Welcome to SJ's classes. In this video lesson, I will discuss the remaining stanzas of the poem The Autograph Tree by Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri. If you haven't watched my video lesson on the initial stanzas of this poem, please do watch it. As I said in my previous video lesson, this poem was inspired by the poet's visit to the Cool Park. Cool Park is in Ireland. It is the country estate of the Irish writer and folklorist Lady Augusta Gregory. The house and the estate was actually built by Robert Gregory. It was later on managed by Lady Augusta Gregory. She is also the co-founder of the famous Abbey Theatre in Dublin, and she is also associated with the Irish literary revival. Cool Park actually became a hub for Irish literature and art, with many famous writers taking various trips to the park. During their stay, they would carve their names into the huge beech tree that stands to this day inside the walled garden. The tree has signatures of iconic figures such as George Bernard Shaw, W.B. Yeats, Douglas Hyde, Sean O'Casey, and J.M. Synge. So it is the sight of this huge copper beech tree that inspires Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri to write this poem. In the initial stanzas of this poem, we saw how he describes the various sights that he sees, how he figuratively lets us understand the beautiful sights which are there at this Cool Park. He also describes a little bit of the past and history related to this country estate. In this video lesson, we will be discussing the remaining stanzas of the poem. Let us go to the poem. The signs of life melt down as letters and names on the bark scraped with blades, leaving pictures, signatures. So the poet is standing in front of this huge beech tree, and he has just witnessed the signatures that are there on this beech tree. He thinks about the great figures who carved their signatures onto the tree. He calls or he categorizes them as yogis, warriors, elders, and parents. And he understands that the signs of life gradually melt down into these letters and names. These letters and names carry the life of those great figures, and their lives are now reduced to these pictures and signatures that you see on the beech tree. Then Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri goes on to talk about the owner of the estate, Lady Augusta Gregory. Lady Augusta Gregory, who sacrificed everything for war, gold, dear son, a family, or fame. So look at this figure. She is the mother of Robert Gregory. I spoke in my earlier video lesson about Robert Gregory and how he influenced W.B. Yeats to write poems like An Irish Airman Foresees His Death and certain other poems. So this figure, Lady Augusta Gregory, was actually a popular figure in Ireland. As I said earlier, she is one of the persons behind the founding of Abbey Theatre, and also she was a significant member who contributed much towards the Irish literary revival. So this figure, says the poet, has sacrificed everything for the war. Gold. It does not symbolize the gold that she had, but probably it symbolizes all the wealth that she had, all the asset that she had, including her family. Gold, dear son. Robert Gregory was the only son of Lady Augusta Gregory, and she lost him during the World War. Now she says that, or the poet says that she has lost everything for the war, or everything during the war. Gold, dear son, a family of fame. So she has lost everything, literally. Young Singe, who gave voice to the agony of Aran Islands, who shook your pride with his arrow of truth and laughter, William Butler Yeats, the man of long penance, who distilled the past to fill the mind with the rustic wisdom of today. So Namboothiri quotes some of the poets who are part of the history of Cool Park, and also writers who have contributed much towards the Irish literary revival. The very first writer that he comes across is J.M. Synge, John Millington Synge. Vishnu Namboothiri says, young Synge who gave voice to the agony of Aran Islands. Aran Islands is located on the west coast of Ireland. You might have probably come across his popular work Riders to the Sea. It's based on the islands, and it's after his stay, a series of stay at these islands, that he wrote Riders to the Sea. So he had a great exposure to Aran Islands, and their agony has been greatly expressed through his works. So Namboothiri says, young Synge who gave voice to the agony of Aran Islands. Then he comes to George Bernard Shaw and he says, Shaw who shook your pride with his arrow of truth and laughter. Now, if you have read Arms and the Man by George Bernard Shaw, you will understand why Namboothiri uses the terms truth and laughter. George Bernard Shaw, through his works, tried to convey the realistic, or tried to make a realistic portrayal of life that he saw around him. And he also did that in a humorous manner. Now both this realism and humor is conveyed through the play Arms and the Man. So Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri is also discussing the features of these specific writers. The third writer that we come across is William Butler Yeats. Let us look at what Namboothiri has got to tell about him. William Butler Yeats, the man of long penance. Penance means remorse, who distilled the past to fill the mind with the rustic wisdom of today. Now, William Butler Yeats was very close to the family at Cool Park. Now, what he does is he tries to remove the bad experiences of past. Perhaps he tried to console the family because it had to confront a great loss due to the death of Robert Gregory, Lady Gregory's son. So perhaps he tried to fill the mind of the people in that family with the rustic wisdom, with the knowledge that, or with the richness that the family had once in the past. They are the ones who with the twang of their little veenas send a shiver down the spine of those who smile their white smiles and plunder the country. So Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri also points at the colonization, the imperialistic forces that once had control over the Irish land. He says, they are the ones who with their twang means a vibrating sound, who with their twang of their little veenas, as you know, is a stringed musical instrument. Now here it corresponds to the rhythm, the music, the verses, the diction that is used by these writers, who with the twang of their little veenas send a shiver down the spine of those who smile their white smiles. So they are the ones who actually made the whites feel afraid. It's through their powerful words that they send a strain of nervousness, a strain of anger, a strain of shiver down the spine of the whites who were in control of that land. Namboothiri says, they send a shiver down the spine of those who smiled their white smiles and plundered the country. Now, as you know, Ireland was under British rule. It became completely free and republic only in 1949. Until then, the country was completely under the rule of British. So it is these writers who contributed much towards the revival of freedom in that country. As I kiss these signatures with lips moist with tears, which wavy ocean roars in my heart? Vallathol, Bharadiyar, Rabindranath, Light of Bengal, Neruda, who pledged himself to his land, Sicilianos, who adored Athena. Wherever prisons had been erected around the truth, there arose the sound of the word, hard as diamond breaking the lock. So he is probably trying to bid goodbye to the place, and therefore he kisses these signatures. As I kiss these signatures with lips moist with tears, so he saddened after seeing the sight of the signatures, by thinking about the past, by dwelling upon the great personalities that these men were and how they had contributed in reviving the freedom of the land. So he actually feels happy and sad at the same time. So as I kiss these signatures with lips moist with tears, which wavy ocean roars in my heart? So he hears some kind of a roar from his inside, somebody trying to speak up. Vallathol, Bharadiyar, Rabindranath, the Light of Bengal. He refers to many of the Indian poets. Now, as you know, Vallathol Narayana Menon and Chinnaswamy Subramanya Bharati, who is a Tamil poet. Vallathol, as you know, is a Malayalam poet. And Rabindranath Tagore, who is a Bengal poet. Now, all these are nationalist poets, and they have written poems on Indian freedom movement. Probably that is why Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri quotes them here. So Vallathol, Bharadiyar, Rabindranath, and also Neruda. Neruda is Pablo Neruda, Chilean poet, who wrote much about the kind of slavery, the kind of misery that his country went through during the colonial rule. Then he also talks about the Greek poet Sicilianos, who fought much for the liberation of Athens. So we have writers, we have poets who have struggled or who have conveyed the ideas of struggle and misery to the struggle for freedom, actually the struggle for freedom through their work. And he quotes Vallathol, Bharadiyar, Rabindranath, Pablo Neruda and Sicilianos. Wherever prisons had been erected around the truth, there arose the sound of the word hard as diamond. So wherever prisons had been erected around the truth, so whenever somebody tried to cover up truth, or whenever injustices were hurled towards their country, towards their people, now these writers or such writers aired their opinions. They conveyed the struggle for freedom through their words, through their poems. There arose the sound of the word, and what is the nature of the sound? It is hard as diamond. So their words weren't delicate words, their words were very hard. Now it had the capability to get into the minds of people. It had the capability to sustain itself. It was really hard words. And these hard words were able to break the lock which was put around truth. The lock which was put around the truth in the form of prisons. Remember the legacy of the land, the courage of the peasants, the wisdom of the sages, all that creates the history of modern man. So this voice from inside, it tells the poet Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri to remember the legacy of the land, what you have inherited, who are your predecessors. Now you ought to remember them all. You ought to remember it. And also remember the courage of the peasants, people who took part in the struggle for freedom, the wisdom of the sages. Sages are spiritual mentors. So you ought to remember everything, the legacy, the courage of peasants, the wisdom of sages. And ultimately the sound says, the voice says, all that creates the history of modern man. So in effect you need to remember your past, the path which you took to reach here. Shining a comely dimple in his words, hiding the arms of war inside, Sridhara Menon Master whispers in my ear. So he brings in yet another literary figure. He is Sridhara Menon Master. Now Sridhara Menon is an all-time inspiration of Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri, and he is famous for his work Kudiyozhikal, which can be translated as eviction of the tenant. So Vishnu Namboothiri listens to the sound of his great master Sridhara Menon. And what does this figure say to him? Our ancestors are the ones who burned a torch with this fear. Our ancestors, our predecessors, people who wrote before us, are the ones who burned a torch with this fire. They had lit themselves with this fire. They had kindled their writing with this fire which they had made by fighting against their oppressors, by talking about the struggle that everyone was making for getting freedom. So our ancestors are the ones who burned a torch with this fire. So it's something like a revelation that Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri is coming to. Walking back from this Naimisha forest, where the leaves fall in the wind blowing, separating the grain of human history from the chaff, a new wisdom dawns on me. So as I said earlier, Vishnu Namboothiri is coming to a point of revelation, probably an epiphanic moment. And he calls the Cool Park as the Naimisha forest. He equates Cool Park with Naimisha forest. Naimisha forest is, as you know, a sacred forest which is frequently mentioned in the Puranic literature. This forest is in the bank of the river Gomati, which is located in Uttar Pradesh in India. The Mahabharata story is narrated in this forest according to the description provided in the epic. So it has this Naimisha forest has connections with the Puranas and also the stories that are part of the Puranas, the great epics that are part of the Puranas. So he equates Coal Park with the Naimisha forest. This Naimisha forest, where the leaves fall in the wind blowing, separating the grain of human history from the chaff. Chaff is the seed covering, the inessential or the unnecessary part of the grain. It's through chaffing that you get rid of the chaff of a grain. So this Naimisha forest, this cool parks helps you to get rid of this chaff, this inessential in you, this unnecessary in you. And as this happens, a new wisdom dawns on me. A revelation happens to the poet. He converges at a new understanding. And what is that new understanding? My head held low in respect, poetry stands guard to freedom. So this is that great understanding that he comes to. He understands the greatness of poetry, and he also comprehends how this medium of poetry stands guard to freedom. And perhaps that is why he has been quoting so many writers who had contributed much towards the freedom struggle. Writers like Synge, Shaw, W.B. Yeats, writers like Vallathol Bharadiyar, Tagore, Neruda and Sikelianos. It's through these names, it is through the writings of these great poets these great writers that he has come to this understanding, to this revelation that poetry stands guard to freedom. It is a shield against the night's huge invisible net of bondage. So it is a shield, something that protects you from the net of bondage, the chains that put you at a particular place, the chains of lack of freedom. So it is a shield against the night's huge invisible net of bondage. And finally, he concludes by stating that poetry is wisdom to the world. So this is what gives wisdom to you. This is what conveys wisdom, rational reason to you. So he begins with plain statements on Cool Park and what he observes there, and finally he converges at this great understanding, or he finally concludes at a great point wherein which he gets this revelation that poetry is the wisdom to the world. So there our poem ends. This poem was translated into English by K.M. Krishnan. I hope you have an idea regarding the poem The Autograph Tree and also the poet Vishnu Narayanan Namboothiri. Thank you so much for watching.